The silence of space hung heavy over Callisto, one of Jupiter's frozen moons. The mining station, half buried in ice and dust, had long since stopped receiving visitors. Most of the workers had left months ago, searching for safer colonies. Only one man remained. Commander Jackson Morrow stood at the edge of a rocky ridge, his boots crunching softly on the frost. His breath fogged inside his helmet as he stared into the cold night, stars distant and still. His once proud Earth Fleet uniform was worn and faded. He no longer wore rank on his collar, just a name patch stitched over the heart. The war had taken everything. Earth's great cities had burned. The fleet had fallen. Billions were gone. And worst of all, the galaxy had moved on, believing Earth to be a grave. Jackson hadn't spoken to another person in over 6 months. The mining outpost systems barely ran. He stayed for the quiet and for the guilt. He disobeyed a direct order during the war to save a civilian convoy. His action had saved lives, but cost the fleet a critical battle. He had been cast out, blamed for the loss, and left behind like scrap. He deserved it. At least, that's what he told himself. The station's sensor tower buzzed softly in the wind, its broken panels creaking. Jackson walked back inside, sealing the airlock. The corridor lights flickered. The place felt like a ghost ship, more dead than alive. Inside his small control room, he poured himself a cup of lukewarm synth coffee and sat in the cracked chair. The station's sensors blinked with their usual static and meaningless readings. But tonight something was different. A soft alarm chirped, a low-power anomaly detected below the surface. Jackson frowned. He adjusted the scanner settings, narrowing the beam. The signal came from deep under the ice, nearly 4 kilometers down. A faint energy pulse, steady and deliberate. Not natural. Not mining tech either. Something else. Could just be a glitch, he muttered. But his gut told him otherwise. He loaded a crawler sled with supplies, a thermal drill, oxygen tanks, and an old EVA suit. Within the hour, he was driving out over the icy plains, following the signal. The terrain was brutal. Cracks, frozen ridges, and sharp wind gusts. After 3 hours, he reached the signal's origin, a flat stretch of ice, silent and unremarkable. But the scanner still pulsed. Jackson activated the drill. For hours he carved deeper into the ice, layer by layer. By the time he reached the 4th kilometer, his hands were numb and his oxygen low. But then the drill struck metal. He widened the hole carefully, brushing away ice with gloved hands. The surface beneath was smooth and dark, too smooth for any natural object. Suddenly, the ice groaned. A section gave way, and Jackson fell through. He landed hard on a grated metal floor. His helmet light flicked on. Around him stretched a vast underground hangar, abandoned, hidden and silent. Enormous support beams lined the walls, crusted with frost. Massive cables hung like vines. And there, in the center sat the ship. It was huge, longer than any cruiser he had seen, sleek and angular, coated in dark metal that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. The hull markings were old Earth Fleet design, but unfamiliar. The ship looked newer, sharper, experimental. Near the nose, partially covered in ice, were 5 painted letters. Aegis. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. He knew that name. Project Aegis, the dreadnought that never launched. Built at the war's end, rumored to be Earth's last hope. Everyone thought it was destroyed before it could fly. But here it was. He approached the side hatch, wiping away a layer of frost. A small access panel blinked to life as his hand hovered near it. Command signature detected. A voice said suddenly from hidden speakers, Commander Jackson Morrow, Earth Fleet, access granted. The door slid open with a hiss. Jackson stepped inside slowly. Stunned, lights flickered on one by one, revealing a cold, empty corridor. The air was thin but breathable. He removed his helmet, his breath visible in the chill. The ship welcomed him, as if it had been waiting. Somewhere deep in its core, The systems began to hum. After years of silence, the Dreadnought Aegis was waking up. Jackson stood in the center of the corridor, staring at the lights coming online. Maybe, he whispered, Earth's not done yet. The metal corridors of the Dreadnought Aegis stretched out like veins, silent and long forgotten. Frost coated every surface. Lights blinked slowly to life as Jackson Morrow walked through them, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Each step felt surreal. He was inside a legend. A weapon Earth was never meant to use. A ship the galaxy believed was gone. He made his way toward the command bridge, following illuminated arrows along the floor. The power grid came online in sections, humming low and steady. The walls shivered with life. When he reached the bridge, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was vast and dim, filled with inactive consoles and a large circular command chair at its center. Thick glass panels revealed the icy ceiling above. As the lights came on, they cast a soft glow over the room. It looked like the ship had been sealed yesterday, not decades ago. Then a voice filled the space. Commander Jackson Morrow. Authorization confirmed. Welcome aboard the Dreadnought Aegis. He turned toward the sound. A flicker of light formed above a console, shaping into a calm blue holographic face. I am Silas, onboard combat AI for Aegis-class warships. Operational status: dormant for 14 years. Current status: reinitializing. Jackson stared, unsure whether to speak or run. Silas, he said slowly, you know who I am. Your biometrics are in the Earth Fleet Command database. Your record shows former rank, Commander. Tactical specialization. You are the highest-ranking surviving officer to make contact. That grants you captain authority. Jackson stepped forward. I thought this ship was lost, Silas said. False, Silas said. Aegis was hidden by Fleet Command during the final year of the war. Original mission: survive the fall of Earth and await reactivation when a viable commander arrived. So you were just waiting, Jackson muttered. Correct. Jackson sat down at the main console. Dust coated the edges, but the system interface still glowed clean and sharp. He skimmed through files. Construction date 2463. Mission class: Heavy Assault Dreadnought. Stealth capable. AI-assisted targeting. Planetary bombardment systems. Fusion core with hyperlight capability. Why wasn't it launched during the war? He asked aloud. Silas paused before answering. Fleet Command believed using Aegis would provoke the Kerex into targeting Earth with total planetary cleansing. It was held back for last resort defense. Command broke down before launch authorization could be given. Everyone thought it was destroyed. Disinformation campaign successful. Jackson leaned back in the chair, absorbing it all. Earth had a final weapon, and they buried it to keep it safe. But now no one was left to use it, except him. He looked up. How much of the ship still works? Core systems 57%, weapons 39%, navigation 44%, life support stable, hyperlight drive inoperative. That bad? Survivable. Repairs possible with time and salvage. Jackson nodded. He'd worked with worse. The war had taught him how to fix things with nothing but grit and scrap metal. He looked out at the hangar through the bridge window. It felt like standing at the edge of something bigger than himself. The Dreadnought wasn't just a ship. It was a chance. I'm going to bring this ship back online, he said quietly. Confirmed, Silas replied. Over the next several hours, Jackson explored the ship. He mapped its layout, made note of broken systems, and activated maintenance bots that had long been dormant. Most were dead, but a few still moved, limping machines that could help with basic repairs. He returned to the mining station to bring tools, parts, and oxygen refills. Every trip across the ice was risky, but he moved fast and worked harder. He spent his days inside the Aegis, his nights either repairing circuitry or studying ship specs. Silas proved to be a capable partner, efficient, logical, and calm. He answered Jackson's questions and made repair suggestions. He also played back fragments of Earth's last messages before going silent. Jackson listened to each one. Families begging for help, commanders issuing evacuation orders. Static. Then silence. There were no orders now, no admirals, no governments, Just one man and one ship buried under the ice. On the 7th day, while repairing the forward sensor array, Silas spoke with urgency. Commander, long-range passive detection array is now partially functional. I am picking up a fleet on approach from the outer rim. Jackson turned away from the console. What kind of fleet? Kyrex signature. Size approximately 18 capital-class vessels. Current trajectory suggests sweep through human colonies near Saturn and Mars routes. Jackson felt a chill crawl up his spine. They think Earth is already gone, he said. They think no one's left. Assessment likely accurate, Silas replied. Jackson stared out through the frost-covered bridge window, fists clenched. They're wrong, he whispered. And I'm going to show them. The Dreadnought had waited long enough. Jackson Morrow stood in the engine bay of the Aegis, sweat dripping from his brow despite the cold air. The fusion core thrummed quietly now, no longer silent but still not at full power. He had spent the last 2 weeks inside this buried relic, pulling life from the frozen bones of a ship built for a war that never got to use it. The ship felt more alive each day. Lights stayed on longer. Doors responded faster. Silas the AI sounded clearer and quicker with every repair Jackson completed. Still, the ship was far from ready. Status report, Jackson said, wiping grease from his gloves. Silas replied immediately. Reactor stability at 63%. Shield systems at 22%. Primary weapons remain offline. Internal systems functional, but hull integrity compromised in 4 sectors. Jackson sighed. Enough to fly. Yes. Enough to fight. Uncertain. Jackson set down his tools and walked the long corridor toward the bridge. As he passed through the central spine of the Aegis, he could feel the size of it. How this wasn't just a warship but a fortress. This was the kind of ship that once made the Kyrex flinch. Now it was just him keeping it alive. When he reached the bridge, he stood at the central display console. A small, cracked panel showed the growing threat beyond Callisto. The Kyrex fleet was moving fast, colony after colony falling silent. We have less time than I hoped, he muttered. Silas responded. Estimated time until the Kyrex reach the inner colonies, 6 days. Until they reach Earth 9. Jackson clenched his jaw. What are the odds we'll be ready? Low. He nodded grimly. Then we'll work faster. Each hour became a battle. He tore through the ship's compartments, rerouting energy lines, reconnecting old Earth fleet software, even building makeshift replacements for failed systems using parts from the mining station. He slept no more than 2 hours at a time, often in the bridge chair with schematics floating above him. He rarely spoke aloud. He had no one to talk to but Silas, and even that was mostly work. Why do you keep going? Silas asked once, unexpectedly. Jackson paused, surprised by the question. What do you mean? You are alone. You have limited resources. The chance of survival is low. Statistically, most would abandon this task. Jackson stared at the main screen. A simulation showed the Kyrex wiping out the last human colony in a matter of hours. I wasn't there for Earth when it fell, he said quietly. I let my people down. I won't do that again. There was a short silence before Silas answered. Acknowledged. Some systems came back online faster than expected. The ship's cloaking field was surprisingly intact. The targeting software still held a partial memory of Kyrex ship profiles. The hangar bay even contained 2 old Earth fleet drop pods, rusted but fixable. In the quiet moments, Jackson found himself remembering the old war. Not just the horror but the faces. Captain Lena Cruz, who died defending the Martian Ark station. Lieutenant Griggs, who laughed through missile strikes. And his own crew, the ones he disobeyed orders to save. He'd traded his rank for their lives. Now he was trading what was left of himself for everyone else's. On the 5th night, something changed. Silas activated an emergency beacon receiver. A weak signal flickered onto the console. It was a human broadcast, distorted and barely audible, but real. This is Colony Echo 9. Under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. No Earth fleet presence. Survivors fleeing to Outer Ring. Please anyone respond. Jackson stood still, listening to the fear in the voice. A young woman, maybe a technician. Her voice cracked in the static. He sat down and took a deep breath. Silas. Yes, Commander. Prepare the Aegis for launch. Systems are not fully stable. They don't have time. Neither do we. He connected his old command badge to the comm system. It was worn, scratched, and had long since lost its access to the Central Earth Fleet network. But it still carried a code. He opened a secure channel to the outer colonies. It would be slow. It might not reach them, but he had to try. He spoke clearly and calmly. This is Commander Jackson Morrow of the Earth Fleet. I am aboard the Dreadnought Aegis. The ship is operational. I am preparing to intercept the Kirex fleet. Earth is not finished. If you can hear this, stand by. He ended the transmission. There was no reply, only static. He turned back to the console and watched the ship's systems rise from sleep. Energy surged through the core. Lights flared bright across the bridge. For the first time in years, the engines began to warm. Then he opened a direct line to the Kirex fleet. He didn't expect them to respond. But it didn't matter. To the Kirex command vessel, he said, voice cold and steady. You believe Earth has no more ships. You believe we are broken. But the Dreadnought says otherwise. I'm coming for you. He closed the channel and stepped back from the console. The Aegis was no longer a ghost. It was awake. The Dreadnought Aegis broke through the ice, above Callisto like a monster rising from the deep. Metal panels and frost cracked and scattered as the massive ship climbed toward open space for the first time in 14 years. Engines roared. Lights blazed across its hull. The black sky above welcomed it with silence. Inside, Commander Jackson Morrow stood at the bridge, staring out the main viewport. His hands rested on the control rails. The stars stretched far in every direction. The glow of Jupiter shimmered behind them. Earth lay hidden somewhere across that empty distance, still quiet, still waiting. The ship was not ready. Shields were still weak. Weapon systems were only partially functional. Hyperlight drive remained unstable. But the Kirex fleet was moving fast. Jackson had no choice but to go now. Silas, he said, voice firm. Plot intercept course to the enemy fleet. Confirmed, the AI replied. Enemy fleet on current course to inner colony paths. Intercept possible within 17 hours at sublight speed. Do it, Jackson ordered. Thrusters ignited, and the ship turned sharply. The Aegis, for all its size, moved with power and purpose, like a sleeping giant finally standing. Jackson watched the star lines shift as the course adjusted. It had begun. Hours passed. The ship flew silently through open space, its sensors reaching far ahead. Jackson remained at the bridge, reviewing enemy data. The Kirex fleet was large, 18 capital ships, and dozens of smaller escorts. Each vessel bristled with energy weapons and armor. The kind of force that had crushed Earth. Jackson studied the formation. Veller's ship sat at the center, bigger, darker, and more heavily armed than the rest. The Kirex high strategist led from the front, arrogant and confident. He didn't expect resistance. Why would he? Earth was supposed to be dead. Silas, Jackson said, send another message. Same frequency as before. Open channel. Channel open. Jackson didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke like a man giving truth to the dark. To High Strategist Veller of the Kirex Empire. This is Commander Jackson Morrow. You said Earth had no more ships. You were wrong. I am coming aboard the Dreadnought Aegis, and I promise you this, your war ends today. He closed the channel. Silas was silent for a few seconds. Then transmission received by Kirex fleet. No response. They won't respond. Jackson said. They'll come. He turned and began final system checks. Silas guided him through the weapon systems. Rail cannons, plasma torpedoes, pulse emitters. Only half were online, and energy reserves were limited. Still, It would be enough. 17 hours later, the Carrack's fleet appeared on the sensors, sharp signatures glowing red on the main screen. Jackson sat in the command chair, suit tightened, eyes locked ahead. Enemy fleet in visual range in 60 seconds, Silas said. Jackson exhaled slowly. Keep the cloak on, no signals, no weapons yet. Let them see a ghost. The Aegis crept closer. Carrack's ships were scanning casually. Their formation was loose, standard patrol pattern. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't care. Then the cloak dropped. Jackson fired the first shot. A long-range kinetic slug ripped through space, slamming into the lead Carrack's frigate. The explosion was massive, blooming like fire in the void. The fleet jolted into action, alarms flashing across their formation. Jackson gripped the controls. Now we fight. The second barrage came fast, torpedoes slicing through their center. 2 more Carrack's ships burst into flame. The Aegis flew directly through their confused lines, cloaked again for a brief moment, then decloaking to strike hard. Silas directed targeting as Jackson controlled movement. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but the Aegis moved like a phantom. Hit, vanish, hit again. Every second of surprise cost the Carracks. Inside the enemy fleet, chaos spread. Veller's voice finally came through a static-filled channel. Earth's last captain, the Carrack's commander sneered. You fight with 1 ship. 1. Jackson answered calmly. It's 1 more than you expected. He cut the line. But Veller's ships had regrouped. They began to coordinate. A dozen vessels surrounded the Aegis, pounding it with plasma and shock missiles. Shields dropped to 20%. The ship rocked violently. Sparks burst from the overhead panels. Jackson gritted his teeth and held the controls steady. Silas spoke quickly. Hull breaches in sections 9 through 12. Weapon systems overheating. We are sustaining critical damage. Divert power from non-essential systems, Jackson said. Reroute energy to pulse emitters. Confirmed. The ship launched its final wave of heavy torpedoes. 4 enemy destroyers fell, but the Aegis was burning. Fire crawled across its rear decks. The starboard rail cannon exploded, taking a section of the hull with it. Jackson knew he had 1 move left. Silas, he said, spur taking this to Veller. Risk of failure is high. Noted. Do it anyway. He plotted a direct course for the enemy flagship. The Aegis surged forward, breaking through the wreckage and fire, weaving through enemy fire. Jackson took manual control, fingers flying across the console. Every alert screamed at once. Fire, power loss, reactor instability. And then there it was. Veller's ship loomed ahead, wide and monstrous, weapons glowing bright. Jackson armed the last plasma core. This is for Earth, he said softly. He launched it straight into the heart of the enemy command ship. The core struck. A white-hot explosion lit up the entire battlefield. The shockwave knocked the Aegis back, tearing apart both ships in a blast of fire, light, and silence. Jackson's screen went dark. Smoke filled the bridge. Systems went quiet. Silas's voice faded. Jackson sat alone in the dark, breathing heavily. The Carrack's fleet was retreating. They had lost their leader, and now for the first time in years, Earth had spoken back. Smoke hung thick in the air. Sparks dripped from the ceiling like falling stars. The bridge of the Dreadnought Aegis was a wreck. Panels torn open, systems flickering, wires exposed. Commander Jackson Morrow stood in the center, coughing, his face smudged with ash. Blood trickled down his temple from a cut above his brow, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Silas's voice was weak, flickering between words. Primary systems, critical. Reactor core, unstable. Life support failing. Reroute all power to maneuvering thrusters, Jackson ordered, steadying himself against the rail. Seal hull breaches. Keep us flying. Processing. The AI replied. Partial power restored. Guidance limited. The Aegis drifted through space like a wounded predator. The explosion that tore through the enemy command ship had shattered its center, killing Velor and sending shockwaves through the Carrack's formation. The rest of the enemy fleet had faltered. breaking formation. A few turned to chase the Aegis, but most fled in confusion. Velar had been their mind. Without him, they were scattered. Jackson pulled himself to the console and stared at the navigation readout. His hands moved quickly, rerouting what systems still responded. He could barely see the screen, but he didn't need perfect data. He knew space. He knew war. Status of the weapons array, he asked. Silas answered slowly. Only the portside plasma turret is operational. Ammunition depleted. Power reserves minimal. And shields, 9%. Jackson exhaled and looked out through the shattered viewport. The battlefield was littered with debris, broken Kyrix ships spinning in the dark, their flames dimming. It looked like a graveyard. One the Aegis had made, but they weren't finished. Sensors picked up 3 enemy cruisers regrouping. They were charging weapons. The Aegis was their target. They're coming back, Jackson said. Confirmed. He turned from the console and ran to the emergency core access bay. His legs ached. His ribs felt cracked, but he kept going. He climbed down the ladder to the inner core chamber, where the fusion engine pulsed erratically. He had one last move. The core's backup stabilizer was offline. If he forced the plasma loop to overclock, he could release a concentrated energy wave just once. It would overload everything left on the ship. It would disable the cruisers, but it would leave the Aegis completely powerless. He opened the access panel. Silas, he said, can we still aim our core output, only with manual override? Then prep it. We're going to blind them. He grabbed the handles and pulled hard, yanking open the safety locks. The core surged to life, humming louder with each second. Lights on the panel flashed red. The ship trembled beneath his feet. Ready, he shouted. Targeting, locked. He slammed the override lever. A blinding pulse of blue-white light erupted from the back of the ship. The energy burst spread like a shockwave, slamming into the enemy cruisers. Their systems shorted instantly. Lights dimmed. Engines sputtered. The ships drifted, powerless and blind. The Aegis went dark. Every screen on the bridge faded. The lights died. The sound of the core ceased. Jackson stood in the silence. The hum of power was gone. The heartbeat of the ship had stopped. He dropped into the command chair, breathing hard. His arms trembled. His entire body ached. Around him the dead ship floated quietly in space. He didn't know if help was coming. He didn't know if anyone had even heard his call. He looked up at the stars. So many had died. So much had been lost. But not everything. Not yet. He closed his eyes. Hours passed. Then a soft chime. A light flickered on the edge of the bridge. Incoming signal. Came a faint voice. It wasn't Silas. It was external. Human. Jackson's eyes snapped open. He reached for the comms panel. The screen barely worked, but it displayed one line of text. Signal received. Human vessel responding. He leaned forward. A voice broke through the static. This is the freighter Solwind, responding to Earth Fleet distress code. We received your message. Repeat. We received your message. Aegis, do you copy? Jackson managed a cracked smile. Copy that, Solwind. Dreadnought Aegis reporting in. The sky is still ours. We see the wreckage. Is the ship still alive? Jackson looked around at the ruined bridge. Barely. But it spoke loud enough. More signals followed. One after another. Other ships. Colony vessels. Old scouts. Survivors. All responding to the message. All drawn by the light that Aegis had lit in the dark. Hope had heard the call. Jackson sat back and closed his eyes again. Not in defeat, but in peace. He had done his part. He had brought the war to their doorstep and sent them running. He was no longer the forgotten man, no longer the outcast. He was the last captain of Earth's greatest ship, and the galaxy knew Earth was still here. The Dreadnought Aegis drifted in silence, a shadow floating between stars and wreckage. Its massive hull was scorched and broken in places, glowing faintly from cooling plasma and exposed metal. One side of the ship had been nearly torn open, and only emergency lights flickered across the bridge. But it still existed. Inside, Commander Jackson Morrow sat in the command chair. His uniform was torn. Dried blood streaked his temple. He stared at the dim view outside, at the shattered Correx vessels and the cold, empty sky. He had done what he came to do. Earth had spoken again. "Silas," he said softly. No answer. He tried again. "Silas, status report." Only static replied. The AI's voice had gone quiet after the core overload. Jackson didn't know if the damage had erased the program completely or just shut it down. He didn't have the tools to fix it. Not anymore. Not in this condition. He leaned back in the chair and listened. Silence. But it wasn't empty anymore. His eyes drifted to the far edge of the console. The old emergency receiver blinked slowly, just once every few seconds. But it was steady. Someone was coming. Within an hour, the first human ship arrived. It wasn't a warship, just a freighter. Old, dented, patched with spare parts. The Soulwind. Its engines sputtered as it approached, and its transmission crackled through the damaged speakers. "Commander Morrow, this is Soulwind. We're here. We've brought help." Jackson reached over and pressed the transmit switch. "Understood. Be advised, my ship is badly damaged. Minimal life support. Systems are dead, but I'm still here." The freighter pilot's voice came through, calm and full of quiet respect. "Copy that, Commander. We've never seen anything like what you did here. You turned back a fleet with one ship. We'll get you out." Jackson exhaled, a long breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding. He stood up, slowly, and walked across the ruined bridge. The floor groaned under his boots. He passed shattered consoles and exposed wiring. Each step reminded him of what this ship had gone through, what he had gone through. He reached the docking bay. The doors barely opened. Only one bay had power, and even that was weak. But the Soulwind sent over a shuttle. It docked carefully, landing with a soft clang. The hatch opened, and 2 rescue crew members stepped out. They looked stunned as they took in the scale of the Aegis. It dwarfed their shuttle. "Sir," one of them said. "Are you injured?" Jackson shook his head. "Just tired." They guided him into the shuttle and helped him sit. As the hatch sealed, Jackson turned for one last look at the inside of the Aegis. Cold, broken, dark, but still proud, still standing. By the time the shuttle reached the outer colonies, the signal from the Aegis had already spread. Dozens of colonies received it. Some were in hiding. Some believed Earth was lost. Others had given up hope entirely. But they all heard the same voice, Jackson's voice, the voice of resistance, the voice of Earth. In the days that followed, small groups of ships began to gather. Engineers, mechanics, old fleet officers, people who thought they'd never wear the uniform again. They came to the Aegis, now docked in orbit above a quiet moon, and began repairs. Jackson watched from a recovery ward as people worked on the ship. He wore a fresh uniform now. The rank was restored, commander again. But this time, he didn't wear it for himself. He wore it for the ones who never came home. One morning, an older woman approached his room. She wore the faded green of the Outer Colony Defense Forces. "You're the one who sent the message?" she asked. "I am," Jackson said. She smiled faintly. "You saved my daughter's convoy near Mars, years ago. I never forgot." "None of us did." Jackson nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "We thought Earth had no more ships," she said. Jackson looked out the window, where the Aegis floated, lights slowly returning to life. "It didn't," he said, "until now." Weeks later, a new fleet began to form. It wasn't as large as the old Earth fleet. The ships weren't as advanced. But they had a cause, they had purpose, and they had the Aegis. The Carex Empire had been wounded. Velar was gone. The enemy was scattered, unsure. For the first time in over a decade, humanity had struck back and won. The colonies called it the Turning. Jackson called it justice. One night, alone on the repaired bridge of the Aegis, Jackson stood at the window. Silas's systems were still offline, but a tech team was working to recover him. Jackson placed his hand on the rail and looked out into the dark. This ship was never meant to be a symbol. he said quietly. But maybe it's what we needed. The stars were still distant. The threat wasn't over. But now the galaxy knew. Earth was not finished. They had a ship. They had a leader. They had a voice. And that voice had spoken loud and clear.